Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Luana Nanu, and I am a PhD student at Auburn University. I'm also the president of the Graduate Hospitality Association here at Auburn, and I would like to thank you for participating on this session today. And I would also like to thank the Entry Center at University of South Florida for helping us stream this webinar. Today's session was partly inspired by graduate students and their need for support, and I'm not talking about academic support, but more of a moral support. So our speaker today, Dr. Maslak, is an associate professor at Florida State University, and his main area of research is how firms learn about risks of failure and how firms deal with these risks as they innovate. He is also building an editing platform called Reciprocity to help us become better researchers and writers. This project morphed into the Reciprocity Project. The Reciprocity Project helps students, faculty, and research folk by providing a real, authentic look into doing research. As part of this project, he is also an active YouTuber and TikToker discussing topics related to academics, research, and graduate students. The Reciprocity Project has touched over 1 million across all platforms. So without further ado, I'm giving the floor to Dr. Maslak to tell us more about his session today. You can write your comments in the chat box, and we'll make sure to put them on the screen in an anonymous manner during the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luana. And so today I actually want to talk about how I kind of learned that graduate students don't really need more information. What they really need is a lot more support. And if we could get the slides to pop up here. And I'm going to just tell you the story about the Reciprocity Project. I think it's very deeply personal for me, and I'm just telling my story with this. That's where I want you to know that this is not as formal as you think it would be. So I'm an associate professor at FSU, and my background is actually in engineering, but then I did a PhD in strategy in Canada, both at Canadian universities. But I grew up in a small northern Ontario town. About 6,000 people live there at this moment. Dryden, Ontario, really I always say it's in the middle of nowhere, but it's really not. It's a beautiful spot, but not a lot of people were academics in that town, and this is part of this whole story. So the Reciprocity Project was really a story about entrepreneurship. And, I teach innovation and entrepreneurship and things like that. And I thought it would be a little difficult for me to actually teach about these things without doing some sort of entrepreneurial venture. And so I wanted to create some sort of side project and have it funded by myself and my wife, and sort of figure this out as we're doing these kind of things. The typical sort of Shark Tank story. But it evolved in a much different way, I think, as I've gone with this project. And the motivation really was thinking about, how do I advance science? I want to do more than just me. I'm a lone researcher. I want to create some sort of organization that can actually do a lot more, but then also thinking about, how can I build a legacy for myself? So when I'm going to die eventually, right? We have a 100% chance of dying. And once we die, I want to make sure that there's some sort of legacy that's left over that my kids are going to be proud about, and thinking about how to actually do this. And the story of the Reciprocity Project actually started out as kind of like a sort of a flash of genius or whatever. I don't know if it was genius, but it was a flash of something. I was driving home. My kids were, my youngest one, I think, was about 3 years old. And my oldest one was 5.5 at this time. We're driving home. It was just myself. My wife is a veterinarian, and she was at a conference in Orlando, and I was driving the kids home coming back to Orlando to Tallahassee. It's about 4 hours away. And when I was doing that, I was thinking about a problem that I had, and I really struggle with writing. As an engineer, I'm not necessarily the best writer. It's not what I went to school for. And so I really struggle with this. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if I can create some sort of system that sort of mimics academia and mimics the experience that I would have had, or I had in graduate school, I had a lot of feedback from the people that I was close to, right? My supervisors. And there was lots of feedback all the time in terms of helping me become a better researcher. So I thought, well, couldn't we build something like that would mimic that and have other people get into science, right? So there's this whole movement called citizen science where everyday people can help in the scientific effort, and that this was kind of a big thing at the time. And I thought, well, this would be really cool if we can encourage more people to be part of science. So I started out in kind of an engineering approach, right? I thought that this would be a tool that would help us write, and then if it ever became profitable, then eventually create some sort of scholarship. Percentage of the profits will go to scholarships, and think about it in that kind of way, right? Like very engineering approach. I was also thinking about at the time that in the social sciences, we lack a causal understanding of a lot of things, and it's difficult to do experiments in field experiments. And so I thought, in software, there's this thing called A/B experiments, where software companies are running these A/B experiments, which are really just randomized controlled trials. And what happens, if you don't know this, Google runs these, every software company runs these. There's tens of thousands of these experiments being run at any given time, and they're just showing you different screens and seeing how you react to it. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if there was a platform where people can do this, some researchers in the background can do this, and something that's a very real experience that helps us. So I went and started this thing. And that's how reciprocity.com started. It was really just a writing feedback platform, and it was modeled after the sort of sharing economy type platforms that you might see, right? The typical ones with home sharing or vehicle sharing and things like that, where it was a two-sided platform where you can upload your work as a writer, and then there would be editors on the other side that would give feedback. And it was designed in such a way that it would incentivize you to give reciprocity, to pay things forward. So what you would do is you would upload your document, you would edit somebody else's work, and you would get credits for editing that work. And eventually those credits can be used to upload your own document, and you can edit your own work. And then I thought, it would be cool as an engineer, and as a chemical engineer, we're taught to clean things in a very procedural path. And what you would do is, say you would take some dirty chemical, and then you would run it through a series of steps, and at the end you would have some really clean chemical at the end of it. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if we could do that with writing? Put in all these different add-ins and stuff like that to ensure that we have some good writing at the end of it. So again, this is very engineering approach, very kind of like I'm that I'm solving a hard problem. And this is kind of what it looks like in the inside, where you can earn or pay credits, and then the editors will they'll receive credits, and they can eventually turn those credits into money as they do more and more of these things and do a better job of them. What I did, though, this is back in October 2016, I tried to get a team together, an entrepreneurial team here in Tallahassee, and it didn't quite work out. So what I did is I actually got a contract developer, and they built this thing. And my wife was actually really kind of upset with me because it was a really expensive endeavor to build this thing. I built this thing, put it out on the internet in October 2016. I was really excited and really proud about myself. And I did this kind of like, ta-da, did the whole Facebook launch and stuff, and absolutely nothing happened. There was nobody that used it. It was just crickets, right? And it was very painful to put this thing out and to go through this experience. So I talked to a friend of mine that was doing some software himself. He said, well, why don't you start doing YouTube videos? So we started doing YouTube videos, and one thing led to another. And on YouTube, there's almost 1 million views on YouTube. This is one of my first ones that I did that you're seeing here. And what I started out is actually just talking about the technical aspects of it and talking about this platform. But it's morphed over time in terms of me learning about myself and learning about you and learning about other people as I've been doing this. Nobody cared at all about the technology, and nobody cared about sort of information, more information, right? The more that I disclosed of, this is a certain topic in strategy, or this is a certain topic in innovation, very few people cared about that. It wasn't important to a lot of people. And what was important is when I started actually sharing my story, and I started talking about myself and going into what it actually means to be an academic in a very real way. If you don't know, my story is that I actually was the first one in my family to go to college, or go to university, as it's called in Canada. There's 6 kids, and higher education in my family until I went away to school was a really, really scary and weird thing. It was completely foreign. Coming from this small town with 6,000 people, the only people I knew that went away to university were actually my teachers in high school. So it was a really scary and foreign thing. My parents, actually, they didn't complete high school. My grandma was an orphan who barely completed grade school education. And then my grandpa was actually, he was wounded he was a wounded warrior in World War II, and he had really, really severe PTSD. I'm not sure if you know of anybody that has severe PTSD, but they can't do a heck of a lot. We didn't know any of this stuff at the time. I was sort of making this, looking back and thinking about these things. It's been like, oh my God, it's been totally amazing. I've learned all about this as sharing my story on YouTube. And I began to realize like how an amazing thing all of this is in dealing with it. So my dad and his family, actually, they're Polish. So I'm a Polish immigrant, second generation immigrant, and they escaped Nazi occupation in 1935. And where they settled was in this really remote part of Canada, and it was their job to clear the woods and clear all the trees. And it was a really tough experience. It was, minus 40-degree weather for months, several months at a time there. It's very, very cold. And so them going through this experience, and then me seeing, eventually getting to the point of like going to college, was like, it's totally foreign and totally weird. In fact, my parents discouraged me to go, didn't want me. I know it's weird to say, and a lot of people might think that this is really strange, but they discouraged me from going away to college and university. And when I tell people that, they don't quite understand it, but I totally understand where they're coming from. In elementary school, again, I was the youngest of 6 kids, but not only that, we had something really tragic happen in my family. And I think it sort of framed why my family was scared of a lot of these things and going away to university. My oldest sister was actually, so my parents adopted Cheryl, who was, she was in the Ojibwe tribe. She was an Aboriginal little girl. So they had her from birth. And when she was about 12 years old, I think, she ran away from home and she was murdered. And in talking about this story and talking about this stuff is not something that we openly talk about. It's really hard to talk about these things, but struggling with this and knowing that this is part of my story, I need other people to know. And I also need you to know that I was in special ed until I was in like 4th grade. So being in rural Canada, rural Ontario, there wasn't a lot of resources there, and we didn't know really, my parents didn't know what was going on, and so I wasn't good at a lot of different things. And what I learned over time, as I sort of dealt with different things, I learned to go inward, but then also I learned that studying and working hard was a way for me to prove to the world, and for a way for me to sort of in a way, escape this reality. And I didn't know this at the time, and this was a real journey for me to figure this out. But, it has been a way for me to escape. But what I learned too, and what I've been talking about a lot on the YouTube channel is, it's not only this way to escape and to go to a better world or do something, better myself or whatever, go level up, whatever you want to call it. But there's also this inherent struggle that we go through in academia as graduate students. I went through this a lot as professors, as researchers. We really struggle with a lot of different things, and I don't think the rest of the world gets it. So we have these really unique struggles that we deal with, and a lot of me being on the YouTube channel or on TikTok or whatever you might have seen me, I'm talking a lot of time to me. And I'm talking to either me as a person right now, and it's very therapeutic, or me as somebody who is 25 years old and going away to graduate school for the first time and having nobody else to rely on, and feeling, all of those things that we all go through, like feeling like we want to quit, right? Like that was a real thing. I wanted to quit a lot. This still happens to me on a regular basis, feeling like a failure, feeling like I'm not good enough. It's funny that I ended up studying failure and learning from failure, but it's like really part of who I am. Dealing with the tenure process and dealing what it means to actually get tenure, both on, struggling up to get tenure, but then as well as like, oh, I had all these weird rush of emotions after getting after tenure that I just was not ready for. And so I try to talk about those and dealing, having a family in graduate school. Had my kids when I was still a PhD student, my my boys, and it was a real interesting thing, to say the least, and dealing with that. And then now I know, why I was struggling when I was younger. As recently I figured out that I have ADHD and struggling with that and dealing with all those kind of things as a professor. So it's funny, if you come and talk to me and you introduce yourself to me because of the ADHD, I am not going to remember your name in about 5 minutes. It's gone. And, I thought that this was like, I thought it was, I can practice all these kind of things. No, I can't do that. I can't remember those things. But, what I've learned through this process is, and as I started disclosing a heck of a lot more, I learned a lot more, not about myself. It's not just about me, but I knew that there was a lot more other people that were going through these exact same things. So I actually view YouTube and Google as everybody's like 2 a.m. confidant, right? So I actually got a funny story about this. So when I think I was in grade 5, I was watching the Golden Girls, and one of the girls on there, Blanche, the one in the middle, they were talking about her being horny all the time, and I didn't know what it was. So I actually had to go and ask my friend Ian, and he was just like, he was all embarrassed, and so he took me to the seesaws away from everybody, and then told me what that actually meant. And so I actually view myself as, being the one person on the internet, on YouTube, that's actually trying to tell people like how these things actually work. What's it like to be an academic and go through all these kind of experiences? Because, at 2 a.m., sure enough, you're going to be freaking out and you can't sleep, and you're going to want to actually turn to somebody and talk to somebody and listen to somebody. And you don't want to actually talk to, you probably can't talk to your spouse a lot of time, but you might be able to listen to this crazy, weird guy on the internet talk to you about the different experiences that we go through. So another thing that I learned as I started disclosing more is that this is a really big phenomenon, and I think that this is actually the tip of an iceberg of something that is going on, is that science is actually suffering from what I call a self-confidence crisis. And a lot of it actually has to do with the uncertainties that we deal with in science. We have, as scientists, I actually view ourselves as more explorers than, as somebody that is sort of categorizing or classifying things. I think we're more explorers, where we're venturing into the unknown, and we don't have the right answer. And we're never going to get the right answer, whatever that right answer is. And everybody sort of thinks that we should have the right answer because we're scientists, we're all knowing. But in reality, we don't. We're kind of bumbling through things. And so when we have these uncertainties, we often deal with this as people. We deal with this in three ways. First of all, we're really afraid to talk about any of this kind of stuff because we think that we're alone, and we think that we are the lone nut that's there, and nobody wants to talk about it. The second thing that happens is a lot of us go inwards, and so that's me. That's my personality. Is I go inwards, and I experience things like anxiety or depression or all these negative feelings, or beat myself up, and I think that I'm a failure, all those kind of things. But then there's another group that I think happens in academia that we all know about, and this is where people get aggressive and they go outward, and they think that they have to promote in various different ways, or be aggressive to somebody else, or the infamous second reviewer or a third reviewer that just tears you a new one. And it has to deal with all of these things where we're sort of battling in the battleground of science, where we're battling with these uncertainties. And instead of dealing with it in its sort of calm, collective way, we deal with these emotions that we experience of dealing with uncertainty in these very emotional ways. And we don't talk about this, right? We have what I think is going on, and there's a great Catherine Kellogg, and she's at MIT. She's really good as a researcher, and she was actually talking about the cultural trend that's happening within surgical suites in this sort of collection of work that she has. And she was talking about how norms are changing in surgical suites with surgical residents. And there's the old norms that we have, and I view this as actually kind of like in science. We have what she called is Iron Men. And these are actors that defend mental toughness and long work hours and doing things because they're the tough things that we need to do. And this is the way that we need to actually do these things, because that's the way it's always been done. And so you can imagine there's all these social norms that are tied to that. But then we've got this sort of other cultural norm where, we've got like two working parents, for example, juggling a couple of kids, and we're trying to figure out what the heck we're doing with ourselves with all of these things. And we're trying to balance this and make sure our kids are normal and well-adjusted, but at the same time trying to be research productive, and having all of these different struggles that you deal with. I think we're really going through this real cultural clash where things are really changing in science. And I think what I'm seeing in YouTube is actually a reflection of this, where we are, instead of going and talking to somebody, people Google it or they YouTube it and they start talking about these kind of things. So what we really need in science is to know that you're not alone in any sort of way. And to also know that everybody else around you, no matter what they are saying and what they look like, know that they all suck too, just like you. They all do, and they just show up in different ways. And so knowing that everybody else is kind of imperfect gives us motivation and hope to be able to get some of these things done and be able to do the things that we need to do. And the second thing that I think we really need in science is start teaching about compassion and empathy and how to do good science, and how to, what does that actually look like to be a good scientist, to do things systematically and carefully, but at the same time, not being aggressive in any sort of way, and being sort of compassionate when people are really struggling with things, and empathetic when people are struggling with things. So I want to almost end here in terms of what I've been saying, but if you're really struggling in graduate school, there's been a lot of things that have helped me out. So you can go on the YouTube channel. But what I've learned, one of the big things, and I have to relearn this all the time, is you have to practice gratitude. You have to be thankful for what you have and where you are. So we get in this kind of tunnel vision thing. We start thinking about our sort of micro problems that we have and the difficulties that we have. But what you really should do is take a step back and think about how amazing it is that we live in a world that allows us to sit down and study the things that we want to study. If it was even if it was 50 years ago, like, this is what's going on with what happened with my parents, right? Like, it was very much a story of they were living in a different generation and a different thing, a different time, that all of this is just impossible. And all of a sudden, my generation came through and it became a possibility to do these things. And so to know that you have those possibilities is incredible. That this is really a joyous thing, and we should take advantage of it. The second thing that I think is important is that we need to remember to be patient with what we are doing. Remember, the things that we're doing, it's not going to happen. The papers you publish, the things that you're expecting to happen, the social, the influence or notoriety or whatever you want, right? The whatever. It's not going to happen overnight, and it takes decades for people to build their careers and to build their stories for other people to be able to see those things. So having that perspective that you need to be patient, it is very important. And I think the third thing that I've seen really helps me out, and I hope it helps out other people too, is to know that you're good enough, even if you have all of these flaws and all of these issues. So me talking openly about my sister Cheryl, it is incredibly hard to openly talk about these things. It's incredibly hard for me to openly talk about the fact that I was in special ed for years. I always thought that I was problematic, a failure. And this has been who I am, and I view myself, but reminding me and hopefully reminding you that you're good enough with who you are and to be you and to tell that story, that's an incredible story that lots of people would love to hear. So if you want to help out, before we go to questions, send me a note if you're interested in doing any of these experiments. You're thinking about doing sort of experimental stuff on online platform. Happy to entertain them and talk to you about them, and we can maybe set something up. The second thing is make sure that you share the message of kindness in academia. I know it's like, this is totally not cool stuff, right? to talk about kindness and things along those lines in academia. I should be like hard-nosed and getting you to like go and do some really rigorous stuff. And it's a real struggle for me, right? Like dealing and talking about these things, because I'm an engineer by training. Talking about fluffy stuff is real tricky. But I think it's so important for all of us to know that we need to be kind, not just to other people. Be kind to yourself, I think, is the more important thing. If you're kind to yourself and you realize that you're pretty incredible and you've done a lot up until this moment, then hopefully you'll be kind to other people, because it sort of takes the stress off of what's going on. And the last thing is to remember, or if you could sign up to reciprocity.com. I mean, it's all geared towards helping out graduate students and researchers. So please go and check that out. So thank you so much, and thank you for listening to this, and special thanks to all the people that help out with the Reciprocity channel. And Reciprocity project is growing a lot more at this moment, with lots more people that are being involved. But thank you so much, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions at this moment if we want to talk about them.
Yes, and we have quite a few questions, and I'm going to pop them up on the screen in a second. So one of our first questions was actually about your platform. Mm-hmm. And they were asking, how do you ensure that people don't actually, how do you ensure that the ideas in the paper submitted will not be stolen by others? Any support to prevent that?
Yeah, that's a constant question that I get. So first of all, you get to see who it is that's actually using, or that's going to be editing. So at the end, you see who it is, but I'm going to be putting that up front and allowing you to be able to choose that. But there's also contractual contracts that I get people to sign if you need to do that. There's contracts that are on it. as well as the rating systems on it. And then if anything was to go on like that, I immediately kick those people out, because we can't tolerate that. That's inappropriate. But thank you.
That's a great question. And someone also asked, they're curious about the back office system of your website and if it's a WordPress solution. But since you mentioned before it was custom built, I didn't.
Yeah, it's custom built. So the blog is WordPress, but everything else is custom built with a lot of other mechanics going on in the background.
And now I have a lot of more personal type of questions. Not personal, but more related to being a graduate student. And so one question was about, I feel like my advisor does not support me, and I do not know how to tell them I feel unseen. How would you advise them to deal with that? Should they kind of go and try to talk with the advisor, or should they talk to their peers if they had a certain similar situation? Or
yeah, that's a really tough question, because I think a lot of us feel like that, right? And I think what I would do is for you to actually have that tough conversation and really sit down and say, hey, I'm feeling this way, and be okay with the fact of saying that you're feeling this way. And if they have an aggressive response, if they don't try to address it, if they make you feel belittled, you need to get out of that relationship. That's totally not, you should never feel in any sort of way. This is a weird situation because we would not tolerate these kind of things in the working world, and yet we somehow feel like we have to tolerate them because there's a status divide that we see in academia, that we think that we should tolerate these things. But know that you're pretty special and you're a good person, and if it's not working out, that relationship might not be the right relationship for you. But definitely sit down and have that conversation. I know it's super hard to have those conversations, but they're important. And if you do get any sort of negative responses, then you do need to go and if you don't talk to your chair, and if that doesn't work out, because I know a lot of universities that might not work out too, because sometimes chairs are more supportive of certain folks than others. Then you go up the chain of command and you go talk to your dean, you go talk to your provost, whatever. That's why we have this hierarchy in universities, to ensure that you feel okay. And I think that's the important thing, to feel okay.
That's great advice. And I have a follow-up question about research. Mm-hmm. I get overwhelmed with starting research as I feel I don't know enough. How can I get over this feeling?
Oh my gosh. So you're just like, you're preaching to the choir. And one thing that we end up tending to do is, if we feel like we don't know enough, we tend to do more writing or more reading and more reading and more reading. But I don't think that's actually the right way to do things. I think you need to actually tell your research story and your story, what you're doing, just by writing it down and telling that sort of journey of how you actually got to where the insights that you have, right? So one of my supervisors that I work with dearly would talk about how the research journey is all over the place, right? And you don't want to necessarily talk about all those kind of things that go all over the place. You want to tell the story of how to get the reader from here to there, and to go through that process in that sort of way. But to know that we all go through this journey and we all know nothing. I mean, it's so funny so a funny thing will happen is, especially as graduate students, you will feel so stupid at this moment. And then the funny thing is, when you go and teach this, or you go and tell somebody once you're done, you're like, oh my God, I know so much, and how come they can't understand it? I know this, I know this. How come it's so easy? It should be all intuitive. How come you can't do that? And that's exactly what's going to happen at this moment, is that you're at a moment where you're going through the difficult time of struggling through the idea, and everybody goes through that. And that's part of this uncertainty that I was talking about. So stick with it, is what I'm saying.
So this is very similar to that question before. So what's your best advice when someone doesn't feel like they're good enough? And this is pretty common, actually. You hear a lot from students. They feel like that they get overwhelmed with the information that their peers or professors know, and then they don't feel like they can catch up. So what should they do in this?
So again, it's common, and I'm not a therapist. If you're really having difficulties and challenges with these things, please go talk to a medical professional. That's a really important thing, and we all have to use them from time to time. So don't feel embarrassed. And what I've learned is that you have to get into your own cocoon, or your own sort of just get into your own little cubby and not worry about what everybody else is doing. The quickest way to make me feel awful about myself is to talk to somebody else about their accomplishments, or to look on their CV, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm just so pathetic. What am I doing? But in reality, everybody has their own journey, and everybody gets to the certain spot that they're going to get in. You have no idea. A, you don't know what they're doing in terms of, what's going on. B, you have no idea what their research actually looks like. And often when you start looking at what they've done, you're like, oh yeah, okay, I understand. There's just so many different factors that you should never ever feel, you should never feel like you're not good enough, as long as you're just doing the work and you're doing your job. It just takes you taking that step forward and just, going into that cocoon, or that little shell, and living your life, living the amazing life that you're living at this moment.
Yeah, living your life, that's a very good example. I think a lot of graduate students kind of pause their life and just focus on the study, and kind of forget to do anything else for their self. So which leads me to one of our next questions, which, and you kind of touched upon this when you were presenting a little earlier. So do you believe we need to kill ourselves with work as graduate students? This is always promoted by professors, by social media, and advisors. I've heard it several times, in order to excel in PhD, you need to sleep at your desk. You need to be there all the time. You need to study nonstop. You need to know everything,
So I am not the top of my field. I'm going to tell you this at this moment, and so maybe I can't speak for those people that are at the top of the field. But what I can speak for is what I feel okay with, and what I can actually do is when I actually have my life around me. I've heard that. I mean, wasn't it Albert Einstein that said that there's no room for family in science, or something like that, right? You need to do that. But, so there's two things that are going on there. The first thing is, I've actually asked and did a poll on the Reciprocity Project of how many people actually work on weekends and what are their hours, and it's surprisingly normal. Most people, it's surprisingly, they're working a 9 to 5. And most people, maybe they'll do 3 hours on the weekend or 4 hours on the weekend, but then they'll get that Sunday off, or whatever your time off, or whatever you're doing, right? Whatever works for you. And then the other thing is that you really do have to get into that cocoon where you are worried about what works for you, and you are doing the things that allow you to persist. I mean, so there's two goals that we have in strategy, that we often talk about. It's talked about a lot in business strategy for a company. And you can all imagine yourselves as little wee companies, sole proprietors, and your job is to sell ideas, right? And to sort of eventually make some money off those ideas by getting tenure track job or whatever. So those two goals is, the first one is to perform, and you can perform very at a high level, right? And instant performance. The second thing is survival. And we forget about that survival. And if you are feeling down about yourself, you're feeling that you can't do anything, you actually, spiral out of control, which a lot of us will end up doing at various parts of our time, or we're forgetting to recalibrate. That's when you start questioning yourself and you start thinking like, man, I can't do this. I want to leave. And then there goes your ability to survive a long term in academia just disappears at that moment, or research, or whatever you're trying to do. And so I don't personally believe, frankly, I don't believe it when people say that. I think that they're full of blankety blank. And the second thing, I just don't think it's healthy for us to be like that as human beings. There's a reason why we've evolved over the last 100 years, since we started sort of analyzing work hours and stuff like that, why the 8 to 10 hour work day kind of works.
Yes.
That there's a reason for that, and that's why the rest of the world does it.
I totally agree with you. One other question that's kind of related to what you're doing. So do you encourage students to go on social media and share their skills and knowledge? There's a lot of TikTokers nowadays on YouTube, talking about graduate school and tricks and whatever. Do you think that would help you kind of build yourself and, like you said, learn about yourself more?
So I wouldn't do it for like professional development. It's taken me years to get. Remember, I started doing this back in 2016, and now it's 20. So by the time Luana actually reached out to me, she's the second person that's reached out to me professionally because of it. So I mean, think about that, right? Like the returns from that are just not very good. I think I have a bit of sunk cost fallacy going on. Because I've invested a lot of money in this thing. I wanted to get it to work. And then, B, I'm doing it for me. I'm not doing it for professional development or whatever. I'm dealing for me to actually deal with the world that I live in. And so if it's going to be helpful for you to know that people will, make fun of you, that actually it happened very early on when I was, on YouTube. It's going to happen. And if that's going to drag you down, then I wouldn't encourage you to do it. I would not encourage you to do it. But if you feel that it's something that you need to do, and it's part of who you are, and you want to go that way, I think it actually is a fun experience too. So it's totally person specific, I think.
Yes, you're right. And a lot of people feel more comfortable talking online, sharing on social media. Others are more private. And so one of our comments on YouTube is thanking you for this great initiative. And there are questions about developing your writing style and finding your stride. How did you evolve? How did it evolve for you?
Do I think I've actually achieved my writing style right now? I would say no. It's an evolving construct, I think, and we're constantly changing, but it's just, this process of writing and just writing and writing and writing. There's so much writing involved, and you just have to be okay with that and get used to it. Write yourself personal notes. So science, I think people forget this, is that we think that science is all about the third person and this rigid kind of person that's there, that the all-knowing, what is it, us or we or whatever, that's we did this or we did that, but really it's a personal story. And you write those personal notes and those personal stories about what you're doing, and then eventually you can go back and edit those things out, but it is a very personal thing of what you're trying to do.
And then what are some of the practical ways to teach students empathy, or kind of make them think about this paying forward that you're thinking about, kind of help other students?
So I struggle with this, as we all do. And the only thing that I know that has worked for me is to disclose more about my flaws and the things that I deal with. I'm a little more open about these things, and you don't look as scary, I guess, when that happens. I mean, I will tell my students now, whether they listen, and my undergrad students, whether they listen or don't, I tell them that I've got ADHD and I cannot remember their names. And I literally will go the entire semester without remembering their names. And it's not because I don't try. It just doesn't stick. And I don't know how to do this other than being more open about who you are. And that takes a lot of work. For me, it's taken a tremendous amount of work to be open about these things. And I'm still nervous, and I still get anxious, and I still get emotional all the time about this kind of stuff.
That is great advice. And I think we have one last question. What should I look out for when looking for a potential supervisor as a new PhD student?
Ooh, that's a good one. So I was just thinking about this the other day. I think there's two sort of things that you need to be looking out for. The first one, obviously, is the empathy and the compassion and all that kind of stuff, for somebody to be supportive. But I also think in science, you also need somebody to bop you on your head. There is, whether you are supportive or not, or that you're being a nice person, especially as an advisor or a PhD student or whatever, there is the market. At the end of the day, there's this third construct, and that market is just, it's relentless, right? It does not, you need to be as good as what all the sort of competition is and all that kind of stuff. So somebody needs to say, hey, we need to work on this thing. How they do it, I think that's difficult. But as anybody that's advised anybody or gone through this, that it's very difficult to sort of go through this and be like, okay, what is the right combination of like how bopping somebody on their head to ensure that they sort of think about things, but at the same time, like, being sympathetic and empathetic, because ultimately what people look for as, when you go and get a job or whatever, it's a developmental process, and it's less about you knowing the material. I think that's very important to know the sort of scientific material, but it's also you being able to stand on your own and to take initiative to do things that you are going to be brave. And you need to learn that as well. And as me, when I started out, I was this 25-year-old, naive country bumpkin. I've learned a lot along the ways, with the struggles of that, how to stand on my own. And so I think this is all very important stuff, looking for that balance. So to come back to the question, looking for the balance with supervisors that are supportive, but at the same time, are willing to push you and to say, we need to work on that. That's something that is a challenge for us.
And I actually got one more question on LinkedIn that's pretty similar. Do you think our advisor should or can help with the self-confidence crisis, or is this something that we need to deal with ourselves? Is this something that we need to work?
I think it is. I think it's really touching on a larger trend that's happening in science. And I think a part of it, I've read a lot of philosophy of science and stuff, not a lot, but, like armchair-ish, because I teach research methods, and, I've been thinking about ideas recently. And, even back in the 1950s, even going back to the 1800s, scientists were always really doubting themselves. And there was this. It was really interesting reading about some of the stories of how scientists would go through of like struggling with the self-doubt and people like crapping on them because of the ideas that they have, which in this day and age, we're living in it at this moment. That science is getting a bad rap from a lot of popular culture at this moment, and we need to address this, whatever that looks like. And I think yes, if your advisors can help you and do something, hey, that's great. But not everybody's advisor is going to be able to deal with that. And you have to be the person that stands up and squares their shoulders and says, hey, I'm going to deal with it myself. And I don't care what anybody else says. I'm going to deal with this myself, and I'm going to process this how I need to process it and move forward with dealing with your own self-confidence that you actually have.
Thank you. And I guess we'd have time for one more question, and then we're kind of done with the time. And then the question is PhD for all students? What would be something to consider before deciding to go for?
That's a great question. I don't think it is. Just like I don't think university and college is good for everybody. You have to weigh why you're actually doing it and why you want to do it. You need to think about what is your motivation. If it's a financial motivation, it's actually not a very good. But people are probably going to yell at me, but financially, it's not a very good financial bet in terms of what you're doing. So you need to do it for some other reason that is bigger than you. And if you haven't figured that out, just like university or just like going to college, if you haven't figured out that you are doing this for some other reason, you're probably going to be floundering for a bit, and you're really going to struggle with it. And it's taken me a long time to realize with myself, but what I'm doing and what I'm about, and I'm not there yet. But it's a journey that you go through, and you need to know why you're doing it before you even start, and that's going to help out a lot.
Perhaps you also don't have to rush into it. You can always wait and wait for it and understand whether it's for you or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree, Luana. I think we will rush into we think like education is like the way to do things, but there's a lot of this stuff you can do on your own. If you want to research something, just start researching it. If you can do it in nights and weekends and you do that for a year and you're like, oh, this is awesome, then maybe you should consider doing a PhD. But if you're like, you're doing it and you're like, I'm not going to do it, until I go to school, then why the heck are you doing it?
Yeah, of course. Or like you think that you need to do them like back to back, and don't take any breaks, You just have to kind of pace yourself and think about it if it's really if it's good for you or not.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for today's session, and thank you for the audience for asking us quite very interesting questions. And do you have anything else to add at the end?
Oh, I just wanted to say how honored I am to be part of this initiative that you're doing, Luana, and for all the audience that's there. I mean, it was very cool. Like I said, I've been doing this for a few years now, and you don't know whether if somebody's actually listening to you when you're like saying these things out on the internet, and apparently somebody was. So I just wanted to say thank you for being there.
Well, thank you very much, and I wish everybody to have a great rest of their day.
Right. Well, thank you.